In 2006, an ambitious property strategy was hatched that would lead to the largest commercial leasing deal in Australian history. The deal covered over 115,000 square metres of floor space in 3 locations in 2 capital cities, and would require a complete refurbishment whilst remaining functioning, living, breathing buildings. So how does a deal of this scope and magnitude get done in the face of a global financial crisis? Who were the key players? And how was it executed ahead of time and below budget? This is the story of Project 793. In 2006, Telstra, Australia's largest telecommunications company, had a property portfolio that was sporadic and lacked any inspiration or true direction.
7 or 8 years ago, Telstra were in just about every building in the city. There was no real master plan, no alignment of lease expiries, and if you took a long-term view or tried to get a long-term picture, you really couldn't see it. You were staring at a black hole.
The process of realignment began with a unique situation. 3 strategically important buildings occupied by Telstra were simultaneously up for lease renewal and, by good fortune, managed by the same company, Investa.
Well, I guess as a property owner, you want to have a tenant in your building. That's the main thing. And the prospect of not having Telstra in these buildings could have been almost catastrophic for Investa. So it became really so important that we had to be prepared to look differently and approach this whole assignment differently.
We were fortunate we were going to deal with the same landlord. We thought, well, how do we work together with the landlord and share in the hidden value that could be unleashed by bringing our intentions to the table and making sure that they understand what we're asking them to commit to?
These 3 buildings at Sydney's 320 Pitt Street and 231 Elizabeth Street and the Melbourne headquarters located at 242 Exhibition Street would come to be known as the Project 793 buildings. But hanging over the heads of Telstra and Investa was the fallout from negotiations of 400 George Street in Sydney, another Telstra location managed by Investa.
We were at each other's throats in that negotiation. It was a tough negotiation. Then thinking, oh my God, we've got another 100 and something thousand square metres to lease to renegotiate. This could be hell. And I think we all had that kind of moment in 2007. We thought, this is all too hard. There's got to be another way. We call it the pizza moment. I rang Vito and just said to him, we've got to get together and just stop this crazy way we're dealing. And there's got to be an easier way of us each being able to talk about what motivates our businesses so that we can get outcomes that can suit each other. So it was a very, very seminal moment in our relationship.
This "we're in this together" attitude would set the tone for the whole project. So Telstra had options: to start again, to move, or to renegotiate a lease. But what Vito saw in this potential leasing deal was an even greater opportunity.
So when we looked at all the properties across the portfolio and you get a better appreciation of the volume, you sit there thinking, well, and the lease expiries, we're going to have to move at some point in time. Or do we build more of the same, or is this an opportunity for us to define a new accommodation standard so that people feel reinvigorated and light-filled environment and smarter way of working? And we thought, well, you can't just let this go as a fantastic lease deal. You've got to define a standard and implement that as part of the leasing commitment.
Telstra knew what they wanted, and they were able to explain what they wanted very, very early on in the piece, which meant that we could either provide what they wanted or not. And our view was we were up for the challenge of providing what Telstra wanted.
What Telstra wanted was a complete new refurbishment driven by a yet-to-be-developed accommodation standard. This refurbishment would be funded by Investa, unlocking value for investors' property, and for Telstra, change the way people experience work.
There wouldn't have been as much value in the deal if it had been 3 separate deals with 3 separate three separate landlords. But because Investa realised the value of the Telstra covenant across the three buildings, it meant that we had advantages for them and great advantages for us as well.
Telstra Property was now on the move. A project in Brisbane with property owners Charter Hall would provide the first tentative steps in the evolution of the standards document and provide a platform to develop and test ideas.
The Brisbane was the first project we were able to say, hey, here's the model. We're across multiple locations, and get into a new building, a new office environment, better location. That was 50,000 square metres. And then that would have huge follow-on benefits. Your procurement, your supply chain, volume leverage around unit price, standardisation, duplication processes being thrown out and things like that. And then you could use that as the baseline to improve on going forward rather than just redefine along the way. And we said, right, let's set up a new accommodation standard.
The problem was, no one had done this in Australia before. With no precedent, Telstra, a behavioural psychologist, and Lend-Lease, the construction partner, left for overseas to get ideas and benchmark what they were developing.
Bloomberg by far was the standout eye-opener, the observatory, as they called it. But the minute you walked in, you could feel the energy, you felt the vibe, and people are walking in every direction, bumping into one another. And I'm thinking, wow, it makes you almost want to say, I want to work for this company. This place has got a buzz.
When Vito came back, he talked to, these are the aspects that I think really worked and really excited him about what he saw and how he saw the functionality operating. The message to us was, let's be measured in what we do and understand what we're doing. Let's ensure that it actually delivers on the end outcome that we're striving for, rather than just doing something for the sake of a wow factor.
We also learned a bit about how to implement projects from an engagement and communication point of view. That was very important, to engage and communicate with staff rather than tell them what we're going to do. It's about providing choice and engaging with them.
Key learnings from the overseas trip and the Brisbane development were fed into the standards document, including more detail around reducing the supply chain.
Because of the size and scope of the project, we had to ensure that the supply chain was sized correctly in terms of who we were going to get and whether they had the capability to deliver when we wanted it to be delivered. It was like a factory making furniture. The furniture manufacturer would virtually make it and then deliver it and install it. So you're shrinking your supply chain to the smallest possible extent, which would mean it's quicker, it's more efficient, it's more effective.
To make the environments consistent through not only in this building but throughout Australia, was to narrow the suppliers down from 50 different suppliers or whatever the architect felt like nominating at the time, down to 5 or 6 that would allow us to leverage those suppliers, number one, provide consistency, number two, and if there was a quality issue or anything like that, a service issue, could easily be fixed. And the supplier was interested in fixing it for you.
One of these suppliers was Schiavello Furniture. Tony Schiavello arrived in Australia in 1956 with only a briefcase, but quickly set up shop in a garage in Brunswick. Schiavello Furniture is now one of the largest manufacturers of office workstations in Australia.
We did obviously look at the market very carefully to see what else was out there, but Tony ticked all the boxes. Tony prides himself on good quality design, good quality manufacture, and we get the benefit of it because we get a very good price. Both parties benefit.
The standards document not only outlined the nuts and bolts and how to get them, but also a strategy to change the way people at Telstra work. The strategy flipped on its head the conventional thinking of perimeter offices. Instead, full-height environments were moved to the core, allowing natural light to penetrate the working environment. Open plan, collaboration spaces, and common areas promoted collaboration. It was now time to test what Telstra Properties had been developing, as feedback from the people who mattered most was crucial.
An area on level 34 of 242, which was like a laboratory where we built specimens of all the various conference rooms, meeting rooms, quiet rooms, social hubs, and workstation areas and offices, and we would test that and bring people through it and get their opinions on it to see what they thought of it, and got client feedback. And from that feedback, we changed and manipulated certain things to incorporate.
When you look at the design really comes from those people that are going to use the space. Hey, if you were to go to a new space, what do you think it would look like? What do you want to see it have? And that's largely how we then brought away and massaged all the data to say, well, this is what the standard should look like. It wasn't really our single view.
In the background, lease negotiations had continued until they hit a major hurdle.
It was the worst day on Wall Street since the crash of 1987.
We're down by between 3 and 4.5% generally across these markets. Let's talk about the speed with which we are watching this market deteriorate. We're red everywhere, essentially, down by 4-5%.
We're down over 16%. Dow at the same time has fallen about 18%.
We had 15 banks in our syndicate that determined how everything was how our business worked. And when the global financial crisis hit, some of those banks went broke. So that when we needed to go back and we started talking about this transaction, which made a lot of sense to us, we had to go and get it funded. Now, going back to 15 banks and asking them to kind of put up with another $100 million odd or so, or more than $100 million, that was going to be a real, that was going to be an absolute, monumental task.
I mean, this is volatility we haven't seen, of course, since way before you and I were born, even before our grandparents, 1929.
What started in America last year has now spread to every part of the world.
This could be the most serious recession in decades.
Well, the GFC come along and I thought, beauty, what an opportunity. Everyone's going, what are you talking about? There's no money out there. And I thought, well, hang on a second. There is money out there. What better covenant can you ask for? Morgan Stanley, Telstra. And you could borrow the money cheaper, which meant there was more money on the table because the rate was less in terms of the debt level. So we quickly then realised that this was an advantage as opposed to a disadvantage.
We were able to explain and convince our lending syndicate that this was a very, very strong transaction. It was with one of the biggest institutional tenants in Australia, being Telstra, that it made sense. The consequences of not doing it were quite dire, that they'd have a bigger problem, if we didn't do the deal than if we did do the deal. We were all kind of a little bit pregnant. We had to do it. We had to do it in the most, mutually beneficial way.
One of the things that was great about this deal and that can sort of bring transactions undone is ego. There was a willingness to really focus on the issues. So instead of getting sucked into, playing the man, if you like, the main game was just let's work through these issues. Let's really focus on the solution because there's got to be something that works for all parties. And that was one of those deals where almost because it was so big, everyone really just parked their ego and just focused on how do we get the best outcome for everyone.
Despite the goodwill, unexpected turbulence hit during a flight from Sydney to Melbourne. Turbulence in the shape of a change of management.
Now, the deal was signed, sealed and delivered, if you like. All it needed was a symbolic signature. And Campbell and Cookie were on a plane down from Sydney, and for whatever reason, Sol picks up the phone and says, I don't want you to go ahead with it today.
When the Qantas guy says you can now turn on your phones, I turned on my phone, it rang immediately. It was like on cue. And it was Vito basically saying, there's been a complication, the deal's off. We went everywhere trying to find a spot that was vacant, that we could actually, that was quiet. We ended up going into a cleaner's cupboard, and I had the BlackBerry in my hand and we had it on speaker.
I had to tell them, I'm sorry guys, but you're going to have to go back home. And they were pretty shocked and almost as disappointed as I was, because we didn't know what tomorrow was going to hold.
I think one of the things was that they were going to review everything, review every transaction. And I remember standing there with the BlackBerry in my hand and looking at my colleague Campbell, who was kind of almost like a It's almost like he'd kind of almost panicked, and it was a kind of state of panic because this was so big. And I just actually said to Vito, look, I'm not really worried about this review. I'll let them review all they like. This is fundamentally a very, very good transaction for Telstra. It's a very good transaction for Investa. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing it, but it's a very, very good transaction for Telstra. So if somebody wants to go back and check everything, I'm not worried about it. I mean, it should stand the test.
Michael Cook's instincts were correct. Within a week, the review had given the project the green light. The arrangements were made, this time in Sydney.
We sat at one end and just wheeled the chair and signed as we went around. I signed, and my lawyer, David Stewart, who's my witness, was basically following me all the way around the table. It probably took just on about 2 hours, I think.
Yeah, I've never seen anything like it. You know, you occasionally see, 2 or 3 leases with a sign here sticker. This was a kind of mountain of documents laid out all around the boardroom table at Cor's office in Sydney.
And it was just like you walked out as light as a feather. You could just float away, feeling that you've achieved what you set out to achieve so many years ago. It became a reality.
With the new lease agreement in place and the standards document ready for execution, demolition started in September in 2009. The centrepiece of the project was Telstra's Melbourne headquarters, based at 242 Exhibition Street.
It's a typical commercial high-rise tower, 4 lift rises, big ground floor, huge ground floor because it incorporates a large retail mall, food court, and there's 6 or 7 entry points, so that adds a little bit of complexity to it all as well.
The biggest logistical problem in refurbing the building was not interfering with the daily operational needs of the staff or interfering with the customers, almost making the trades and the materials invisible.
Vertical buildings are great from utilisation of space from a footprint, but it means everything's got to go vertically up and down, and that's usually constrained by a couple of goods lifts.
As demolition started, the goal was to remain invisible whilst working to a KPI of 80% waste recycled. The schedule was constructed to work in with the rhythms of the living, breathing building. Waste was removed late in the afternoon and taken down the allocated lifts to the recycling bins within the basement. Noisy works were reserved until after 7 p.m, when the majority of the building's occupants had left for the day. New building materials were taken up the building early in the morning, before building occupants had arrived for work.
The bulk of the floors were occupied and people were coming in and out every day, so the whole safety of that, the logistics of that was pretty important, because that really became one of the major constraints, was physically getting stuff up and down. And then added to that a little complications down in the loading dock and the loading bay, which is all in basements, as well as maintaining ingoing and outgoing goods for the people who were working there.
The strategy was to work with an active block of floors while shuffling employees around or out of the building.
The initial staging floors were identified, which effectively are the first floors that you start on, that are vacated, and then you actually start to churn people through. So as those 3 floors became available, people bought in, allowing the vacating of floors further up or in other parts of the building, and then you jumped into those floors and worked through.
We'd mapped out a sequence that was going to work, and we worked it where we had a 2-week stagger between each floor, and we could accommodate up to 7 floors at a time with the logistical constraints. So once we got that cycle going, every 2 weeks you finished the floor, and every 2 weeks you took a floor. So there's always that number under construction, but you took some out and you put some in.
The strict construction timetable meant that Lendlease was effectively renovating a new floor every 6 weeks. This is where the hard work put into the standards document began to pay off.
The benefit we saw with the standard was that decisions on key things like workstations, chairs and all those sorts of things were set in stone. It actually simplified the process because we were able to come up with essentially 4 generic plans for the whole block and stack because there was different cores within the building. Then sit down with the business units and say, well, these are the areas that you can play with. So what it did was it really streamlined the briefing process. It actually accelerated the construction process as well because they were able to start working on certain key areas without necessarily having locked down the final brief from the business unit because certain things were set in stone and weren't going to change. So for us, it was actually an empowering document that allowed us to basically cut to the chase and actually focus on the areas that we needed to focus.
Accommodation standards have been built around that philosophy when we offer it to people to say, hey, this is the baseline, but you've got the ability to choose and configure your space suitable for the function of the business that you're accountable for. And we know how to deliver it because we know the unit price, we know where it comes from, we know how it's designed, so it's very easy to mobilise and quick to deliver.
One of the key drivers for Project 793 was the consolidation of Telstra sites and increasing the density within the 242 building to 1 in 12 square metres per person. This meant a shuffle and reorganisation of the stacks within the building. A key engagement helped with the planning.
One positive thing that Telstra ensured in the process was that the business unit reps that they had were quite senior, and it was really top senior management led. They really did promote that this was a great opportunity for their business to be in a position that they needed to be in. So there was a really good push on having quite senior people working on the project and understand their business unit needs and understanding the bigger picture needs, not just their business unit, but what's best for Telstra and the other businesses to make sure that it all worked really well.
With the changing environment impacting close to 10,000 employees, communications were critical, especially when the audience did not necessarily understand or want the change.
The approach that we had taken on other smaller projects was really about taking people on a journey, show them what the end game is like and help them to see how their working life will be better and improved through this journey. We wanted to have a very deep and immersive communications process. We wanted to get people deeply involved. We wanted them to touch and feel what the changes were, and we wanted to keep them regularly informed about the changes that we were making.
To Telstra's benefit, they did it well. They created a level of excitement. We worked up images which are effectively a section through the building, and you could see the building evolving and changing. And the comms people did an amazing job at Telstra just to keep everybody aware of where it was.
For the people relocating or moving, the process was an 8-week journey.
So we tried to take tours through the construction zone and the space so they could see where they were going to be sitting and understand their workplace that they were moving into so that they could better make it fit for their business. We just tried to get them involved as much as we could and get not just the workplace representatives involved, the people that use the space.
A seamless transition was also a key to making employees advocates.
So what we said to them is, you will move, but the experience you will have in moving will be different to anything you've had before. So we took them through the process that we would use for moving and the way that we would use a specialist relocation company that would manage it all for them. So we gave them the impression that they would leave work at 5 p.m. on a Friday, turn up to work on Monday morning, and within half an hour to hour would be ready to start work, drink a cup of coffee, get ready for the day.
Surveys were used to measure the satisfaction and effectiveness of the change before and after each move.
We have an open plan environment here. It means that each groups, instead of sending an email or calling, will actually just walk down to the desks of a colleague and really have a conversation around, well, how can we help that customer more? And this environment really does nurture that collaboration, that really positive intent that everyone comes to work every day to do a great job and ensure that we can continue to energise the teams as they collaborate in this open plan environment that we're working within.
A bigger communication issue loomed. How do you get people excited about the project if they don't know it's happening? With the construction timetable and the relocation timetable in perfect sync, the project was working perfectly, almost too perfectly.
The ground floor foyer was the most controversial part of the refurbishment. So much pushback and tension within the team. The foyer of the building is the front door of our home. And what we needed to do was give the people the sense that this announcement isn't just something that we read as an employee news. it's actually really happening. And that was a first signal of change to the building, to who we are as a company.
Because we're doing everything so quietly in the background, most of the people didn't even know anything was going on. See, conventional wisdom would have been you'd leave that till the end. So we turned that on its head and said, well, let's do it at the beginning. So whilst we were mobilising, getting all the floors going, which had its resource constraints to go out and procure and start construction, it threw in this other element to it of, oh, let's do all that concurrent with all of that.
So as soon as you've done the ground floor, which every person passes at least twice a day, so you know you're going to touch everyone. Now, why wouldn't you start with that? And why wouldn't you do that so quick, so well, that speaks for itself? And your detractors become advocates very quickly.
An aggressive timeframe was set to show not only Telstra employees but the industry as a whole that the project was on track.
So the reopening of the foyer was probably the biggest piece of work I undertook during the whole program. And the reason it was so big is because it was so public and it involved so many big stakeholders. So we had the Premier of Victoria, we had the CEO, we had senior leaders within Telstra, as well as a sizable employee base. And our communications for that event was external and internal, so it was a huge, huge body of work.
With at the time Premier of Victoria John Brumby and the CEO of Telstra David Thodey locked in for the opening, the date was now non-negotiable. A project that should take 6 months was scheduled for 9 weeks. The schedule, outlined by Lend-Lease, ran like clockwork until an industrial dispute in the last week threatened the launch, throwing the last 24 hours into chaos.
So I managed to get back at about 11:30 at night, and I'm looking down, I could see people running around everywhere, tiles still being laid, walls still being painted. I'm sitting there going, oh boy, oh boy. My project manager, project director, program manager had their sleeves rolled up, setting things out, and we were bringing boxes in and sweeping floors and mopping tiles. It was all hands on deck.
Everyone chipped in. No one asked what to be done, they all just did it. So it didn't matter who you were. You had removalists working with guys with shirts and ties, didn't matter. Rolled up the sleeves to get it done. And that was it was a pleasing thing because we had a common theme. We just wanted to get it finished for our people, for Telstra staff.
It was the camaraderie and it was that pride and that determination that people weren't going to not get there. They were determined, and just to be able to show to all the doubters that we didn't buckle, we never blinked, we got there.
Can I say that I'm delighted to be here today for the opening of the new face of 242 exhibition. And this foyer is an all-important first point of engagement between Telstra state and national headquarters and, of course, the people of Victoria.
At the very heart of what this new environment must be, it must be about our people and about serving our customers. So we've done some things that are different. New T-Life store here on the left-hand side, because we want people to come in here and feel a part of what we're doing here at Telstra. It has to be, a place where people feel like it is our customers' headquarters as well.
Once again, the can-do spirit had shone through, and the new look foyer opened as planned on April 29, 2010. Sensing an opportunity, Telstra seized the moment to create some theatre and buzz amongst its employees.
We draped the area in a black curtain, so while they could see it through the glass, they couldn't go into the area yet. And we had this special event for staff where we drew the curtain back and they were greeted by the CEO, David Thodey, who then welcomed them into their new foyer. And it was just the most amazing feeling to be down there and to see everyone just and looking at it. It made you feel really proud that something you had worked on could have this kind of impact on people.
Telstra Properties had made a huge splash that everyone had taken notice of. Sydney's 2 buildings were also taking shape, with new look foyers welcoming employees and visitors alike. In addition to running on time, the project was now running under budget.
I guess it all started with the procurement, how you went out and bought the job? How did you go and who did you engage with? Who were the suppliers you used? And what was the thinking about their supply chain, their continuity of work for the next 2 years, how they could see it was a win for them and it was a win for us. So we're very careful about who we went to, and then the scope of the work, how we packaged it up. It wasn't just give a whole bundle of stuff to one person, it would break down into, if need be, we would directly purchase elements and simply engage people on a supply-only arrangement. So that took a lot of the risk away from them and gave us control over some of the supply chain. And then you had a lot more flexibility. You didn't suddenly find out, oh, we can't change the sequence because we haven't got X or we haven't got Y. So supply chain was fundamental to it all. And as it turned out, a lot of that delivered some quite useful cost savings.
These savings were then reinvested to meet with the brief of improving the way Telstra employees worked. Updates to the careers and conference centres, prayer rooms, mothers' rooms, bike racks and facilities, and the Telstra Experience Centre were all added to the scope. The most significant investment was around the construction of internal stairs that would link floors and business units, again delivering on the promise of greater collaboration.
I mean, the driver in this was create a space that flips the current Telstra culture on its head and starts to introduce the opportunity for the whole community to collaborate. And those stairs became a critical part of the process, essentially, because what it allowed was 3 floors to be interlinked. But ultimately came back to that collaborative aspect and that socialisation aspect. You walk into that central zone where the stair is, there's more than likely you're able to see a friend that's down on the lower level, pop down and have a coffee with them, have a passing conversation that might talk about work, might talk about other things. So the benefits are there in terms of that cross-pollination of information, but also feeling more like you're part of something bigger than yourself.
A potential headache for scheduling was simply absorbed by the efficiencies they had learnt along the way.
Basic programming logic of how to get the sequence going. And once the sequence was locked down, people got into that routine and they could almost do it in their sleep with following the process. And that's where we were able to then accommodate some time in the programs for when Telstra wanted to then put in interconnecting stairs, which meant affecting 2 floors at once, cutting huge bits of concrete slab out, lifting in steel beams. And so with the efficiencies, we were able to absorb that additional scope within the same program time.
By the end of 2011, the project was at completion, with the final savings reinvested into Level 26, a meeting space for internal staff. A project that had started as an idea had become a reality, and in the process had become the biggest leasing deal in Australian history.
It was great the way that through a global financial crisis we were able to sign up the biggest leasing deal in Australian history, and we think it was probably the biggest leasing deal in the world when no one was raising money.
There's a huge sense of pride. It was an enormous project. Look, from a personal point of view, that project for us was a milestone in terms of the evolution of the practice.
I'm very proud of the team. It was a team. There's no one individual person that was more important than anyone else. It was very successful and we're very proud of it.
The construction phase had run on time and under budget and been refurbished at a rate of 2 3-bedroom houses per week. It affected 10,000 people. That's 1 in 4 Telstra employees. It laid over 7,000 metres of cable, took 1 million work hours, and removed over 100,000 cubic metres of rubbish, whilst delivering on the KPI of 80% rubbish recycled. It also helped consolidate a sporadic Telstra property portfolio and reduced the carbon footprint by 265 tonnes per month. But most importantly, it laid the foundation for a cultural change within Telstra.
Greatest satisfaction for me is just watching people smile and be happy with what it is that they're experiencing. What we really need to do is make sure that the experience of every individual, whether it's a project delivery team or the user, is a memorable one and they've had a say. There's nothing better than being able to walk past a building in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years' time and go, I got a story in there to tell you.